Oh, hello, and welcome to Dark Passages. Dark Passages is a weekly podcast presented by me, Chris Stone, reading stories I've written over the past 15 years or so. The Afflicted, Episode 1. With the warm lemon sun igniting the breakfast nook with splotchy golden hues that reminded him of spilled paint that had caught fire, Keith appeared calm. His crooked, weathered fingers interlocked and tented on the newsprint unfurled in front of him. A forgotten plate of half-eaten toast bordered the newsprint. A lukewarm mug of joe was within reach. Keith appeared peaceful, resigned to his lot in life. His hair had grayed, his skin had wrinkled, and that was okay. It was all part of the deal that we'd all signed up for. The inevitable rise and fall of ourselves. Of course, knowing this didn't make it any easier to accept. Lord, no. In fact, it was quite the opposite. In his youth, Keith had been a real go-getter, the kind of guy that grabs life by the balls and squeezes until they go pop. He'd been a stockbroker trading on margin, what some insiders had called the widowmaker industry. The erratic rise and fall of the great American stock gamble had made some men wealthier than they could have ever imagined, while it left others paupers begging for lunch money on street corners. The job stress alone could press chunks of coal into diamonds, or in his case, rupture arteries. And truth be told, he'd loved every minute of it. But that was all so long ago. Back then he'd been full of piss and vinegar. Now he was just lucky if his piss hadn't turned into vinegar on its way out. He had aged out. He'd made a couple of questionable investments in companies that he'd trusted. He'd forgotten to enact a few measly options when they came due, and before you knew it, it was sorry, Charlie. Tough luck, Chuck. See you around the bend, old friend. His parting severance had afforded him this nice, small home where he could comfortably die in. So now it was all just a waiting game. He was just going through the motions, pretending things mattered. He was lacking that drive, that will to exist. With the job stress gone, the excitement was gone. So as it turned out, in fact, as he sat staring at the newspaper alit with orange sunfire, he most certainly was not at peace. Rather, he was at war. The great internal war, his brain versus consciousness. You see, with the gray hair, with the crow's feet and forehead lines, came an infuriating fuzziness. The corners around things weren't as sharp as they used to be. Everything was dulled, refined, ground to a pulp. His brain felt like it was stuck, like an overheated car whose engine just wouldn't crank, or like peanut butter stubbornly clinging to the roof of your mouth. The same brain that used to devour profit and loss statements, crunch through balance sheets, and even chew up the New York Times crossword puzzle for breakfast was now fuzzy and slow. It turned out, when everything wasn't on the line, nothing was on the line. The world was slow, the world was boring, and his brain was making him pay for it. With the sports section unfurled in front of him, coffee ringed and lousing with toast crumbs, he tried to remember who even played for the Yankees anymore. If he could think of just one name, the first baseman, maybe a relief pitcher, someone, anyone, then he would feel at ease. That itching worm that had been rising in his gut would abate and he could finish his breakfast, that forgotten toast and cold coffee. But as he stared at the names in the box score surrounded by their meaningless statistics, they may as well have been Slovakian dignitaries, names as foreign as breakfast tea. The knot in his belly tightened as he tried unsuccessfully to remember just one name, just one solitary name, an easy one even. He focused on the past and tried to recall the name of the great Yankees shortstop of the 90s and early 2000s. The guy that had been so clutch in October when it all counted. You know the one. Every kid in Brooklyn wore his jersey. You know, the guy with the pearly smile, the good boy, good looks that made him a household name. That household name that was right there, right around the corner. So close he could almost taste it, but also worlds away and tantalizingly out of reach. His stubborn peanut butter brain left him helpless. He pulled his attention away from the strangers in the newspaper and looked across the table to his wife for answers. She would know right off who that shortstop was, and then everything would be okay. Because once someone said that thing that he couldn't quite remember, it just all came flooding back, like it had been there all along, just resting in a lockbox in his skull, waiting for someone to happen along with a key. and all too often that locksmith had been his wife. But instead of providing that relief, looking into his wife's eyes instead made that worming sensation twist and turn. Now, as he stared into her warm chocolate eyes, even she was unfamiliar. Sure, he knew she was his wife. He wasn't a goddamn mook. But there were things about her that he couldn't remember, things that should be undeniable, unforgettable. Like, where had she gotten those dangling earrings that shimmered like cut glass in the morning sun? What had been her original hair color before middle age had chosen a bottle of peroxide for her? Where had they even met in the first place? It felt as if she'd simply always been there, sitting in that chair across the kitchen table from him, eating Cheerios by the spoonful, leaving milk on the tip of her chin, drinking coffee that stained her teeth, a dull, earthy tone. These little factoids had up and vanished from his brain, crammed away in that lockbox, or even possibly, more horrifically, gone forever. Sipping coffee from a mug that read Sunnier Days Retirement Home, smiling through the steam, crooked little cap teeth flashing, she asked,
"Cat got your tongue?"
Her smile was warm and attractive. His heart ached as he scoured his memory for those simple facts that he'd forgotten about her. He pulled at those stubborn peanut butter memories desperately. Where had he met her? Christ, it had all been so long ago. He was having a hard time remembering the details of yesterday, much less the details of 30 or 40 years ago. So instead, he started with something simpler. After all, gymnasts just didn't go out and perform perfect floor routines without a little warm-up stretching first, now did they? Instead, he focused on those sparkling earrings, something simple, easy, obtainable. Where had they come from? Those diamonds glimmering in the morning sun. Were they an old birthday present? A forgotten anniversary gift? Or had she simply bought them for herself, a little self-satisfying gift in her late 40s to help her forget about her ever-advancing and inevitable mortality? I'm just thinking about the old days. You know, back when we were younger, remember? He lied in a voice that didn't feel like it was his, that uneasy worm cavorting through his guts, devouring his sanity as it recklessly chewed. He swallowed hard and hoped she hadn't noticed, all the while focusing on those earrings, those goddamn forgotten earrings, those forgotten memories.
"How could I forget? You used to be such the romantic."
With that worm devouring his entrails, he begged his brain to focus. Where had she gotten those earrings? It seemed so simple, such an easy answer, and yet it was proving impossible.
"I used to keep such a close watch over this heart of mine."
She clasped her hands over her heart, interlaced fingers gripping her sky blue sweater. Her warm eyes drifted to the ceiling in reflection.
"And such a dancer you were. Lord, such a wonderful dancer."
Tears moistened her eyes and the earrings winked in the morning sun, coyly keeping their secrets to themselves. Okay, fuck the earrings. To hell with them and their secrets. Instead, he decided to focus on something big. Fuck the tiny details. Details were made to be forgotten. They were fucking designed that way. But the big shit, the important shit, that stuff was forever. So instead, he focused on her. Where had they met? How had she become his wife? Surely he hadn't forgotten how he met his true love. How could he? Had they met dancing in a dirty downtown bar at the end of the last Great War? Him in his Air Force white stiff with starch, slow dancing to Sinatra, dazed looks on their faces, their passions long gone. Neither one felt right. He just couldn't remember, and it was fucking killing him. How could he forget everything that he'd ever cared about? And who the fuck played shortstop for the New York Yankees from 1995 to 2014? So instead, he again shifted his focus back to something simpler. Just one easy thing, her coffee cup. The one with the words, Sunnier Days Retirement Home, emblazoned on it. Where had she gotten that mug? Come to think of it, was that where he was now, in this place called Sunnier Days? Was he a drooling, incomprehensible idiot sitting in the corner muttering to himself, staring out the window into an empty parking lot with great wonder as birds heave their wings against the breeze? No, that was impossible. He wasn't that far gone. He still recognized his own goddamn kitchen. He wasn't a complete fool. At least, not yet. And yet still that mug held its secrets. Where had it come from? So he focused on that one morsel of information, yanking at the hidden truth like a rotten tooth needing extracting from a swollen gum line. Days like this were frustrating. And to think he used to have such a good memory, mine like a steel trap, as his father used to say, couldn't forget a name if you begged him to.
And such a good kisser.
She smiled, covering her mouth with her palm, and giggled softly. Her peroxide curls bounced against her sky blue sweater, lost in a shared memory that he'd forgotten. She was reminiscing on the good times that they'd had, tears of joy dotting her cheeks, and he wanted to remember. Lord, he wanted to remember. With all of his being, with all of who he was, he wanted to remember. He wanted to share in this experience they were having, but he couldn't. He just fucking couldn't. His peanut butter brain was stubborn. So instead, he returned a smile that was a lie on his lips. Those were good times back then. She lowered her reminiscent chocolate eyes to his, sparkling with fresh tears, and his heart shattered in his chest. He wanted to remember. He wanted to take her in his arms and dance with her again. He wanted to be that man that she remembered, the one that he simply couldn't be. For a few excruciating seconds, Keith drew a blank. He just stared at her with an idiotic gaze, and he couldn't help but wonder if she was really there, or if he was simply watching the birds swoop through an empty parking lot at this sunnier days retirement home. But slowly, agonizingly slowly, it came to him, the one thing that he couldn't afford to forget. He checked his wristwatch, the one with the old gold numerals. I should probably get going. She smiled under the soft kiss that he pecked on her damp cheek, those diamond earrings that he couldn't remember buying still winking mockingly in the morning sunlight. He sighed imperceptibly. I'll be back in a couple of hours. He wants to run some more blood work this week.
Sheesh, that Dr. Robinson. He's a regular sadist, isn't he? Always sticking and probing?
Sipping coffee from the mug emblazoned with that mysterious name, a smile cresting lips that he couldn't remember tasting. It hurt lying to her, but the truth, of course, was just too horrible to tell. Keith was dizzy from losing blood again, an inevitable side effect of the treatment that he seemingly would never quite get used to receiving. Those treatments, they really had a way of just making him feel like complete and utter dog shit. They sucked away all of his energy and left him feeling just utterly useless. Fortunately, the side effects were generally short-lived. 5-10 minutes at the most, and he would be back to his old self. Not quite ready to join the Rockettes, but still up and kicking, or at least as close to the old Keith as he could possibly get. He sat on the white hospital bed and dangled his feet toward the floor. His head swooned and his stomach ached, like that time he and his wife had gone on a cruise to celebrate 30 years of not killing each other. He smiled, remembering how she'd looked in the white dress that she'd chosen for the formal dinner. Ah yes, the formal dinner. He remembered it well. Waiters in white tuxedos with tails that made them look like penguins. Acres of shrimp cocktails and lobster tails crammed into crystal vases with miniature containers of drawn butter and cocktail sauce waiting nearby. Aromatic steaks glistened in garlic butter beneath orange heat lamps. Bite-sized desserts stained tiny doilies begging that you eat just one more. Why not? After all, you are on vacation. Yes, formal dinner, that one night on all cruise ships where everyone dressed up and pretended they were wealthy and important instead of just middle-of-the-road, middle-class chumps duped by their travel agent into taking a late-season ride on a floating petri dish. The memories, of course, of his wife's smile, of that third glass of wine that she'd had that night, they were all flooding back with crystal clarity. His peanut butter brain was fading away. He hopped off of the hospital bed and onto old legs that pitched and wobbled beneath his unsteady weight. He could never get used to the feeling of his legs betraying him. His head swooned and his eyelids fluttered as he desperately tried to regain his balance before he fell ass over tea kettle onto the linoleum below. An attentive nurse scrambled over just in time and grabbed his arm before he toppled over and ruined the quiet sterility of the treatment room.
I told you not to get up yet,
she admonished. The nurse, probably half his age, guided him slowly toward a recovery couch, far away from a room full of beds stocked with unconscious patients. This room full of silent donors. She led him to a couch that he collapsed more than sat on. Her cherry lips moved with speed as she told him to just sit and wait, to let the treatment run its course, and to not be in such a goddamn hurry. He watched her lips vibrate like a hummingbird's wings over her coffee-stained front teeth. Her skin was blazingly white, like the skin of a china doll. Her peroxide hair needed touching up. He could see the dark, black roots peeking through just beneath her scalp. He was noticing every detail again. Things were clearing up. His peanut butter brain was going on vacation. The dullness that had enveloped him was fading, and everything was speeding up again. His old, reliable brain was rebooting. The nurse was still talking, but he hadn't been paying attention until she handed him a chocolate chip cookie. He thanked her and took a bite of the stale cookie, shaky hands fumbling crumbs into the couch cushion crevices.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Dark Passages. Please join us next week as the story continues. As always, if you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, share, and rate and review us on iTunes or wherever else you get your podcasts. Please follow us on dark.passages.podcast on Instagram for additional information and episode release schedules. Original stories are all written by Chris Stone and are available on Amazon as ebooks. I'm Savannah, thank you for listening, and we will see you next week.